Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to VICA's 32nd Annual Business Forecast Conference and to the news panel. I'm Alison MacLeod, a partner at KP Public Affairs and your moderator today. KP Public Affairs is proud to be a sponsor of this panel, and I want to also thank our track sponsor for both the future of entertainment and the news panels, Viacom CBS. The biographies for most of the panelists are already in the journal and available online, so I'm going to make very brief introductions so that we have more time for your questions. So today we have with us a very exciting collection of folks prepared to speak to the news industry today and what it means for all of us. We have Tom Bray, the senior editor at Los Angeles Daily News. We have Benjamin Davis, assistant professor of journalism at Cal State University Northridge. We have Barak Lurie, managing partner at Lurie and Seltzer and host of the Barak Lurie Show on AM 870 KRLA, and David Zahnizer, a reporter with the Los Angeles Times. Our topic for this panel today is, where do you get the latest news? There are several news sources that provide the latest updates on things occurring around the world and in our communities. From traditional newspapers to social media and blogs, people around the world are reporting on current events and learning about news through various platforms. How does this competition impact traditional news and the way reporters gather information? What kind of relationships can we expect between the public and the news industry as this new wave of reporting continues to emerge? So that's the framework of our discussion today. I'm going to now give each of our panelists a couple of minutes to make some opening remarks about their viewpoints on the news industry, and then we'll transition to some questions and open it up for more back and forth dialogue. The best way for members of the audience to ask a question of our speakers is to click on the link below for Zoom, and you can then type a question into the chat box that we will see and the speakers can answer. Or if you've stayed on Pathable and are viewing this through that platform, then please send your question through the chat box on Pathable and VICA staff will send it over to me. So with that, let's hear some introductory remarks from each of our panelists, and then we will move into discussion. Let's start with Tom Bray, again, senior editor of the Los Angeles Daily News. Welcome, and tell us what's on your mind.
Thank you, Allison. Glad to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I'm coming to you live from my own personal newsroom in scenic Downey, California. Many of us are working from home right now, and it's a very bizarre setting. For example, if you hear dogs barking, just pretend I'm at the Westminster Kennel Club covering the big dog show. But if you see a cat wander into the frame, I'm in the wilds of the jungle and being attacked by a fierce beast. So that's all typical for a reporter. So wait, that's we do all our newsroom calls, our daily news meetings via Zoom now, and it's very different from what we're accustomed to because really COVID has changed everything. We're doing so much mobile reporting now and virtual reporting. We're covering government entities that are meeting via Zoom. Some of them good at it, some of them not so good at it. When we do have reporters in the field, you know, they're masking up and protecting themselves and being very cautious. It's particularly interesting for photographers now who find themselves shooting more with long glass and backing away from things, but still there are many challenging things to cover that preclude being as safe as they'd like, but we're all trying to follow the safer at home rules and keep ourselves as safe as possible. Not as easy during a protest or during a large group of people, but we're doing the best we can. But these are very interesting circumstances, but I'd say the flip side of that is there's also a ton of really outstanding, compelling work being done in the industry. And I think we're all very proud of that.
Excellent. Well, it is definitely a unique time, and I'm sure there are many opportunities that come from that virtual setup, as well as a lot of challenges, as you've alluded to. So with that, let's transition over to Benjamin Davis, again, assistant professor of journalism at Cal State University Northridge. What do you have on your mind today?
Tons of things, but I can tell you that what's on the mind of my students mainly is their future, and they're experiencing this COVID situation and wondering, will there be jobs for them, and how do they approach the job hunt, and how do they approach collecting news? And I explained to them, I said, look, we're all going through this for the first time. I mean, we are all pioneers in this COVID journalism world. So let's try to figure it out together. The one thing that they have to keep in mind is the basics of journalism. And we are in the best of times for journalism because of the digital infrastructure and the internet. And we're in the worst of times because of this overflow of information that can cause havoc on people who consume news and people who produce news. The bottom line is to maintain a clear definition of journalism, as I tell them, and it is to seek the truth, you attain the truth, reveal the truth, and you just start from there. And the farther you get, the further you get away from that, the more likely you're going to get into trouble. And journalism is a big, huge umbrella. And under it comes sports journalism, entertainment journalism, gossip, politics, so many different things. And that even includes the individual blogger out there that may be wreaking havoc on the world or on politicians. And they all have First Amendment protections, and we have to maintain a good, healthy respect for the First Amendment, no matter what form of journalism we are involved in.
Very good. Thank you. Barak Lurie, again, managing partner of Lurie and Seltzer and host of the Barak Lurie Show. Tell us what you're thinking about.
All right. Thank you so much for having me. Look, I'm in the business not only of radio, but also in the business of law. And I trade in the business of information. And I've learned as a lawyer that it really never works to limit information. You want to throw as much information in there as possible. We have an adversarial system of law, which means that we let both parties, sometimes multiple parties, argue their points, and then the truth usually comes out from that. That's the way I feel about the news as well. My approach to the notion of fake news and how journalism is moving forward and such, my approach is different. And I've written a lot about this. I've talked about it a lot. I've lectured about it. My theory is it was always fake news. Everything that you ever have seen in the past has always been fake news. And I put that in air quotes. What do I mean by that? I mean that this notion that there was a day long ago, the halcyon days of the 60s and 70s, where you would get all your news from ABC, CBS, or NBC in 24 minutes at 5:30 in the evening, that was not neutral news. It was never, somehow neutral there. It was fake. It was fake by omission, and it was fake by commission at the same time. More news is good news. More information is better to have. More sources of information is also a good thing, not a bad thing. In the same way that we want more kinds of computers, more kinds of cars, more kinds of food for that matter. We tend to think that that is a good thing, but somehow when it comes to news, we have this notion these days when we're talking about fake news that there should only be one trusted source and everyone should go to that, or maybe a few of those, and they'll all be vetted and we'll decide that that is the best kind. But that's not the way it should be. And let's imagine somehow you could fashion a news entity that would look the way you want to look. You would never please everybody. There would always be somebody who would declare that that news source would be fake news or not reliable. The point is that truth is what we seek out with the worldview that we have, right? So if you're a religious person, you see things religiously. If you love America and you're pro-America, then you want to see the news reflect that. If you're Jewish, as I am, or pro-Israel as I am, you want to see that reflected. And likewise, if you love music, you wonder why people don't talk about music more, for that matter. So, and then there's the news from the European point of view, the Asian view, the American view, and so on. The point is you can never really capture truly neutral news. There is no such thing. And the best thing we can do is, rather than limit information, is to expand information. And yes, there will be people who present information in a horrible way without backup or anything else. We believe that's true for both sides of the political aisle. But the best thing to do about that is to fight it, not to repress it. And so whether that applies to what's happening with the Hunter Biden story, or the Russian collusion story, or the good people on both sides story, you just want to have the debate and let as many people argue that point as possible. So there you have it. That's my take on the whole news situation that's growing. And I believe that we just need more information, not less.
I like that. I think we're going to talk a lot more about that through the course of this panel.
Sure.
David Zahnizer, reporter with the Los Angeles Times. Tell us just some general insights that you are thinking about when you are looking at the industry today.
Well, I'm basically here because I'm here to plant the flag for local news. I believe in the news business generally, but I believe in local news in particular. I've been doing this 30 years. I've been at the Claremont Courier, the Pasadena News, the Daily Breeze, the LA Weekly, and now the LA Times. And I stayed in LA partly because it's a pretty great place, but I also stayed here because I think it's essential that people in Los Angeles and the surrounding communities know what's happening locally. And I do agree with the previous speaker on one thing, which is that more voices are better and more voices covering local news are better. I think it's fair to say local news is threatened right now because there's sort of been a nationalization of the media that's going on through the industry. And if you believe in learning about your community, you should subscribe. If you believe that a website is producing relevant information to your life, you should support them financially. Because frequently, not always, but frequently news that is 100% free isn't always that great. And you wouldn't ask for free food or free clothing necessarily, and you get what you pay for. And so I'm just here to tell you, I think local news can be amazing. I think local news the LA Times produces is amazing, and we can always be better, and we should be better. But I don't want anybody watching this to not know that that's where I'm coming from.
Very good. Thank you. All right, let's get going into some questions here. I'm going to bounce around to each of you, and then we'll transition over to some of the participant questions. So, Barak, you got us going on fake news. I want to talk a little bit more about that. The term is weaponized by some to try to undermine credibility of certain outlets. And so in those cases, how can we counter these claims and reassure the public that news is trustworthy when it is good and when it is credible? On the other hand, how can we encourage scrutiny when scrutiny is appropriate, when there is actually completely false information that is being peddled as news? How do we do that and strike that balance between necessary scrutiny and the need to ensure trust and credibility, and ultimately result in what you described as a variety of voices out there, which is what we all want and need?
Right. I think the answer to that is the same for both of those questions. And this is what I say to people about that very issue. Each of us, and for that matter, each of our attendees today, they know of a friend of theirs who, let's say, for example, is always dramatic. Everything that he or she says is the most heightened dramatic thing, right? You can, here comes Jerry. He's always, crying about something. The world is so, it's going to come to the end, right? And then you have a friend who always lies. Just every time he speaks, he opens his mouth. You can just say, okay, maybe he's telling the truth, maybe he's not, right? We have that friend. I know, Alison, for example, I know that you have such friends, right? We all do, right? And you have another guy, you call him Bob. Whatever he says and whatever he does, he's so reliable and you could take it to the bank, right? We all have these friends. And so it goes to liars, it goes to drama queens, it goes to worry warts, for example, everything in the context of worry. The same thing applies when it comes to news outlets, right? There's a different character for different news outlets, and we all have them. So, there's a different look, and I'm only saying this not to judge them one way or the other, simply to compare them, because we all know MSNBC has a certain mood and feel to it that's different than CNN. CNN has a different mood and feel to it that's different than Fox News or OAN. Then there's Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and so forth. Each of these, if you treat each of these news outlets like personalities, then you will gravitate toward that news outlet that you perceive to have gotten it right in the past and is not always having to trip over itself and being discredited, right? That's where you win. It's not unlike any other competitive enterprise, whether it's a law firm, right? If I'm a law firm and if I'm constantly losing all my cases, then that's a sign that, you know, maybe you don't want to go to that law firm. But if I'm doing well all the time and I get, you know, results for the client, then maybe you should come to us. Likewise with any product that you buy, a car that you buy, for example. That's the way I think people need to look at news outlets. And we are living in a time where things have been market segmented. And that's not a bad thing necessarily. You can ask the viewer to go ahead and look at various different outlets and maybe get many different viewpoints, which I do. But at the end of the day, people are going to gravitate toward those news outlets that, yes, share their worldview, but that they perceive to accurately reflect the facts, because the facts do come out. And it turns out we'll find out who was right and who was wrong soon enough. And a great example of that was what happened in 2016 in the election. A lot of news outlets promised that Hillary Clinton was going to win. Fox News was less certain about that, but they were also on the edge about that. And that had a big major shift in the way people looked at news. So I think that's the answer to it, is that we gravitate toward those news outlets that treat their outlet as a competitive environment, a competition for gaining the truth and delivering the truthful information. That's the answer.
Very good, thank you. Professor Davis, I'm going to pivot over to a very different topic right now and ask you about artificial intelligence, AI, as it relates to journalism. You've written on this topic and love to hear what you think the evolution of AI means for journalists and how they should preserve their role for producing quality, not auto-generated content. So what's happening with AI?
Well, what's happening is I really want to respond to Barak, but not right now. We'll talk about AI indeed. To David's point about local news, that I am such a big supporter of him. I think he's sitting in the catbird seat with that type of mentality for journalism, because that actually is the future of good journalism, hyper-local, neighborhood journalism that is supported by artificial intelligence, but to a greater degree, 5G wireless. You'll find a consolidation of, let's say, radio networks, audio networks, if you will, digital networks. And as they get bigger and more organized and they seek greater profits and the margins become smaller, they are able to cover less of local news. And just as Cap Cities and ESPN focused on high school sports early on before they became the big behemoth they are now, you'll find that there is local neighborhood wireless networks that are covering the local sports teams, the local Board of Education meetings, the local politics, things that big radio networks won't be doing because of automation and their own profit margin. So it's actually quite a beautiful future, I think, for local, once the full digital infrastructure is in place with 5G in particular. I do know that there's a KBBS station in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, that it's already, instead of focusing on just its urban area, it has sent out 10 reporters to, excuse me, to 10 regions, and they set up their own bureaus there, and they report on the neighborhoods that are surrounding the main station, the main city, and they send that information back, and then the hub sends it back out to viewers. They can get it online, they can get it over the air, but it's this whole idea that the neighborhood news, the hyperlocal news is important. One of the best examples of that in Los Angeles right now I have to say that it's still experimental, is Spectrum News 1. They don't cover car chases and a lot of fires. The police scanner beat, they're not on that as much. They tend to do stories that focus on what one particular person in the neighborhood is doing. And it's interesting and it's different. And they also do it on the cheap. All the reporters are required to shoot with smartphones, which means it's less equipment, less expensive. And I teach my students to use smartphones as well as traditional digital cameras. But this whole idea of being able to zoom in on the micro story, the one that's overlooked by the big news organizations, is becoming more important. The reporters are going to start losing their jobs, whether they like it or not, to automation and artificial intelligence. It's already happened in business reporting in a very big way. Sports reporting, the Associated Press, all of the reporting that they do on minor league sports is done by bots. It's done by computers. And there's a software company in North Carolina, I can't remember the name right now. They actually developed the technology to do play-by-play. So if you don't think that one day artificial intelligence will be doing play-by-play of football games, especially in baseball, it's quite possible. So there's a lot that reporters do now they won't be doing in the future, not too distant future, because of artificial intelligence and 5G when they marry together. The best recourse for journalists is to be able to master the basics of journalism, which is those things that a software program cannot do. Ask the tough question, read a person's face and say, are you confused? Challenge a politician. Asking those type of questions, noticing those human type of things that bots cannot do, that's where the journalist needs to focus in order to have a secure future, and writing well.
Absolutely. Okay, David, moving over to you. Why don't you describe to us the process that you go through when deciding to write a story? And does social media perhaps play a role in that now when it didn't before?
Well, it's funny. I think for people who are not in the news business, this is going to be such a boring, disappointing answer. I feel sad that I'm even delivering it, unfortunately. But I mean, it's like, I get a story from a written report that a government agency produces. I could get a story from a meeting that I follow that involves, politicians. I can get a story out of a press conference. I can get a story out of a phone call. I can get a story out of a phone call from an amazing source who gets good stuff on a regular basis. I can get a text message from someone who just heard something, but isn't sure. I get stories from rooting around, right? Like I cover local government. I cover some local political campaigns. One thing I enjoy doing is looking at the big money that goes into a particular politician and working my way backwards to figure out, what do they want? Why do they want to support this person? Is it a shared ideology, or do they have something they want? Do they have a 30-story residential luxury tower that they'd like to see built? Do they have a contract that's coming forward? There's so many ways to get it, and it's kind of, it makes me sound like a cobbler. You know what I mean? Like I'm just making a shoe over here. In terms of social media is really hard. I find, I think social media is great because it can provide context that you never dreamed of. There was a protest outside a politician's house the other night. I simply didn't know was going to happen. And I look on Twitter and there are people shooting video of it live, that's incredibly helpful to me when I'm in a situation where there's a million competing for my time. On the other hand, Twitter, isn't reality. It's a narrow subset of the world. And in some cases, it's a lot of social media is a narrow subset of folks. That's not necessarily always reflective of a larger population. And, like any other medium, there's not always information that's accurate. And the thing that's hard is, for someone like myself, I want to produce stories that will appear in the LA Times that people will then read. And, when you see something that you see that's not necessarily accurate or on the money, you feel an impulse to want to, address it, but you can't address, millions of messages that are flowing to people back and forth in all sorts of in all sorts of different directions, So I think that's really the harder part. I think the other thing that's interesting about social media is that the way it's sort of really, between the internet and social media, it has democratized a lot of gathering of information. And so, it's not just me and a couple people, reading through an agenda or looking at an agenda report. There are just activists and residents like all over the city who pull up a report and they screen grab it and they post it, or they'll post excerpts. It's great because people are engaged, but it's hard because you are trying to figure out look, I got 8 hours today where I'm going to try and produce something, and which thing do I pick? It's tricky. Have I gone on too long? I realize I'm kind of rambling.
No,
The other thing I would just say is, I would just say really quickly, I think social media is a great research tool. I have a colleague who always says you can get hired by tweeting and you can get fired by tweeting. So I'm pretty square in that regard, and I'm not a fan of Facebook at all. But I will use Facebook to research, and I don't do Instagram because nothing about my life is aspirational. So I think they're amazing tools, but you just have to know what the limits of those tools are.
I'm going to ask you a quick follow-up before I transition over to Tom, because there is a question about the best way to reach a reporter when someone's trying to pitch a news story. So you just described a process where you gather tips, leads from text, from email, from your own research. So if someone has a story idea, something they want you to be paying attention to, tactically, what's the best way for them to reach you and get your attention? And how do they do that in a way that's helpful and pushy enough to get on your radar, but not be annoying?
It's really hard because, every reporter has kind of their different style, right? As you can see, old. So I really love email. You send me an email where you lay out the stuff that you find interesting. That's still a stronger way to get a hold of me than calling me on the phone. I have super limits on my time and stories I know I will never get to that I wish I did. So I personally like email because I'll tell people lay out your case, don't go past 6 paragraphs if you don't have to. Send attachments and I'll look, right? I'll do the best I can within the time I got. Some people are so plugged in, they like a good DM on Twitter, and I think it really depends, unfortunately, for the public, kind of on the style of the actual news gatherer. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Tom, tell us about the newsroom business model and its evolution. We're seeing more investment in online content. Is that changing how you guys are producing stories, or the pace or the types of content you're producing? And has that shift toward online made information more or less accessible?
Well, let's see. First of all, hey, Dave Z, you're not boring. That was terrific. Cobbler Dave is a terrific reporter, and he makes great shoes. And we have a lot of folks like him in the business, and they're doing great work. Dave's got great instincts about what people care about, because inevitably it's still about the story. It's still about the story and how it impacts people's lives. So I'm going to circle back to that in a minute. But on the digital business model, I get more of these calls than you'd think. Someone calls me, they ask for a phone number to get more information, or they want me to track down a hard copy paper from a couple of months or a couple of years ago. And I tell them, that's all online. Just go to the website. And they say, I don't have a computer. Jaw-dropping to actually hear that. I hear it less now, but I still hear it. Now, mind you, sometimes those folks follow up on email, and sometimes they call me on a cell phone. So it's a little disingenuous, but the number of people who actually consider the print product the main vehicle for news is getting smaller and smaller. Obviously, if you started a media entity now, you wouldn't start by buying huge high-tech presses and renting fleets of vehicles and contracting with a bunch of people to put it on the doorstep, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it's an old world business model, and it will be around as long as people are prepared to pay for having that paper on their front porch. It is increasingly a niche product. The business has changed. We are a digital business now. You talk about what percentage of our content is digital now? Well, frankly, all of it. I mean, there are still things in the print product that are uniquely print for people who desire it that way, the crossword puzzles and such things as that. That's the way I prefer to get it, and I'm willing to pay to get it that way. But everything else has changed. Almost all of our content is specifically digital now. We are much faster now. We have to respond because everybody else is trying to get the same story. We tweet, we post video, we send text links, we post documents. We're just much more nimble. The individual journalist is asked to do much more now than they ever have. We're seeing the business model change from that print vehicle that I talked about to the digital vehicle. Now, how it's changing varies depending on what entity you're talking about. For many of us, the model is moving from a print advertising based model to a model that's fueled by digital subscribers. And in my business, that's where we're pushing. At my particular entity, it's how we're pushing. The message is that good, trustworthy journalism is worth paying for. And we're getting better at actually convincing people to do that. And really, it's a bargain when you think about it. When you think about there are all kinds of services out asking you to subscribe out there, from movies on Netflix to all sorts of things, that what we are asking you to pay each month for strong local content really is a bargain. It's clear that print is going to be easing out for many folks. You saw the news this week that the two newspapers serving Salt Lake City in the state of Utah are going to be going from daily to once a week print editions. That was a real stunner. I mean, for those of us who love print, who grew up in print, we hate to see any print entity shut down. But that doesn't mean those folks are going to be without journalism. I mean, journalism is happening 24/7 now, and it's going to come to them via their phones and their laptops and any way that they choose, because it's up to them to choose. At my company, print's doing okay. It'll be around as long as it pays for itself. And a lot of folks in the business are in the same situation. Again, that's how we pay for it varies from entity to entity. We are devoted to a digital subscription model. It's not the only choice. There's still a lot of folks out there who are putting web content up for free and trying to produce a model that is still supported by advertising. We'll see if, and that's impressions-based advertising. The more people who come to the site, the theory is that who click on the advertisements, who click on the content, the advertisers are satisfied with that. That's how the model works. Well, there are still folks devoted to that. There are also a ton of new models emerging out there. We just went to a workshop last year where that boggled my mind about all the different ways that startups are using to pay for their entities. They're being funded by grants. They're partnering with public-private entities. There's a variation on memberships. Some of them are asking for huge sponsors with a focus on their topic to sponsor their content. So it's really the Wild West out there, and it will be fascinating in the next few years to see which of those actually are successful and which of them don't survive. I think information is sort of a big virtual cafeteria right now, and people are deciding how much they can afford for it. And it's kind of like we used to host a community carnival at my church, and it was like people only come with so much money in their pocket. So at your booth, if you've got candy apples, I'm going to decide whether I'm going to buy candy apples or tacos because I've only got so much money in my pocket. And I think a lot of folks online, it's sort of that same approach that I'm going to spend this much money on information. And we hope they are committed to spend that much money on information. So they're going to choose the media entity that works for them, that's giving them the information they can trust. And I think we're seeing that what we call in our business churn the people who go away as new subscribers come is starting to flatten out, which is good news. And there isn't a lot of good news right now. Clearly, we've seen news entities struggle in recent years. We've seen the pandemic has made it particularly challenging, but we're seeing a lot of entities be able to make these financial models work. I think you all read this summer that the New York Times had it's for the first time its digital revenues topped its print revenues. That's a milestone. I can't understate how important that was. Let's see. What are people paying for? I mean, this is amid all the challenges, amid all the financial hits that we're taking, there's good news to be had there, at least for those of us who do news. Because what people are paying for is hard news. They're paying for local news. I mean, that's the stuff that they want it to be trustworthy. They want it to arrive with a consistent flow. So that's what I'm willing to pay for. In those local segments, watchdog journalism does particularly well. People are willing to subscribe for us looking out at what government is doing and holding them accountable. So obviously we saw audiences surge during the pandemic, which is an example of a big story that truly impacted a lot of lives. I mean, it's starting to flatten out now. We're not seeing the spike that we saw early in the pandemic, but clearly there's a ton of information. It's coming at them from a lot of different sources. Some of them are government sources, which they may or may not feel like they're getting at the truth in an unfiltered fashion that way. So people are counting on us to deliver that information. And again, I think they are increasingly willing to subscribe for it. Amid all the change, amid we're tweeting, we're posting video, we're doing things faster, we're delivering newsletters and a lot more curated content, but some things haven't changed. I got some quick bullet points there that the audience wants hard news, breaking news, watchdog news, and they want local news. It's tougher for many entities to deliver local news, so that's kind of a contradiction, but I think that as long as people are willing to commit to that, and especially if they're willing to subscribe to it, people are demonstrating with their clicks and with their subscriptions that they care about what's happening in their hometowns. They care about what's happening in the neighborhood. They want to know what that building is that's going up. They want to know if it's going to impact traffic. They want to know if it's high density housing and how much it's going to cost, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is all important to them. And if anything, the pandemic has amped up that thirst for news. And we hope they're still thirsty when this is cleared and we return to normal, if we ever return to normal. But in the end, it's even though we've gotten more nimble and we've gotten faster, it's still about news. So to answer the second half of your question on the digital divide, I don't think we can really understate the poignancy of that issue. I pulled up a quote from one of our past stories here. I really believe broadband access is a civil rights issue. It was said by a gentleman named Bob Cabeza, who is involved with the YMCA in Greater Long Beach, said a civil rights issue, access to broadband. Said, as the years go on, I tend to agree with that statement, that I can't imagine people navigating their lives successfully these days without full access and unfettered access to the internet. Let's see, about 30% of school children, more than 16 million American kids, lack internet access or laptops. That's according to a Common Sense Media Boston Consulting Group survey. It's pretty simple. If you want to make a living or support your family or keep pace in school or make it to college or get into a better college or find a job or keep a good job or find a better job, you need to be plugged in. And that's really, really vital. It's especially vital to our diverse communities and our low-income communities. We saw early on in the pandemic that while people were dealing with losses in household income and food insecurity, many low-income Latino and Black students in LA County had to contend with not having access to computers or reliable internet. Now, luckily, we've seen a lot of folks step up. We're seeing a lot of school districts hand out devices. We're seeing a lot of agencies step up and provide hotspots and other ways to get internet, but there's still a whole lot of work to be done there. I cited some USC research here that was released in September. that full access to computers or the internet was negatively impacting a huge number of people. Nearly 1 in 5 households in Southern California, there were devices had to be shared, and a quarter of families in Southern California had no internet access or only mobile access, which if you're doing virtual learning, that cell phone is good for some things, but it's not necessarily a great classroom. Many low-income parents don't use computers on a regular basis, so they're struggling right now to help their children cope with distance learning. So this transcends media and whether or not we can connect to those folks. They're having trouble navigating their lives because of lack of internet access. Now,
Yeah,
a lot of good journalism has been done in this area. In 2017, the Press Telegram, which is one of our papers, joined up with other media in Long Beach to form the Long Beach Media Collaborative. They pulled together a project called Strengthening the Signal, which focused on the lack of access to high-speed internet in that city. The project won lots of awards. We're really proud of it, but more importantly, it sparked real response from the leadership there. Mayor Robert Garcia and the city's leadership have taken a lot of steps to try to bridge that gap. And just this month, the city's Technology and Innovation Department launched a new digital inclusion resources hotline to help connect the community to the resources available. So there's also, I think we're going to see the solutions emerge from not just from us telling you about them and shining the spotlight on them, but I think we're going to see a lot more private-public partnerships to try to bridge that gap. There is a project underway right now called the Southern California Digital Divide Project, which includes such folks as the Orange County Business Council and BizFed and county officials and the Southern California Association of Governments, but also a Southern California news group is involved with that. We've got a participant on that. And I think that that's the sort of area where we think change is going to emerge. So I think it's really important, and I hope we do come up with a way to level that playing field.
absolutely. And I think you're right that certainly the situation that we've been in with the pandemic has shown a spotlight on that challenge when it comes to schooling and the need for access to internet in a way that maybe has accelerated hopefully some of these changes and solutions to close that digital divide for at a faster pace than we would have otherwise. I'm going to pivot back over to Barak. I would like to talk a little bit about how social media, we've talked about social media as a tool for journalism, but what I want to now pivot to is social media as a way to amplify journalism that's been produced. So, sharing out content from your radio program on social media, publications sharing out articles on social media, that allows a greater level of visibility. It also allows a way to build an audience, and it also allows you to push content to people that maybe wouldn't have otherwise seen it if you're now showing up in their feeds and helping to, we've talked about the cafeteria and the buffet of news, add more diversity to the buffet of news people are seeing. So talk to me about what you've seen on social media, maybe for your own radio program or just in general, as far as amplifying.
Yeah, no, look, I'll speak about it in two ways. One is in the abstract, in the sense that I think it's wonderful. I think social media is a fantastic medium to, as you say, to amplify the news, and it's a very important part of it. People use social media, I think, mostly as a way of marketing their message, whether it's from a radio show like mine or MSNBC. They want to promote MSNBC, which is fine. I'm all for it. I think it's great. And then it is a way of people being able to not only amplify the message, but see what other people are thinking is important to talk about. So whether that's like I said, the Hunter Biden story or something else that Trump did or that Biden did, great. Here's what I think is important, and I project that out through social media. The problem I have with social media is that to the extent that it attempts to limit people's voices, that's where I really have a big problem. What happened recently with the Hunter Biden story, for example, is very troubling to me, where Twitter or Facebook or Google, for that matter, attempt to suppress information, which is exactly the opposite of what we've been talking about, which is to amplify voices. The response, of course, to that is, well, wait a minute, we want to make sure that we don't want to project fake news out there, but it does seem that the fake news suppression comes largely upon the conservatives, as opposed to Twitter or Google or Facebook trying to stop the fake news as I see it, and many other conservatives see it when it comes to liberal leaning news. There's very little suppression of that. I know this very well because I'm very involved in a lawsuit from PragerU. I'm on the board of PragerU against Google and YouTube exactly on this issue. There is a very selective enforcement, to say the least, when it comes to conservative voices. So I do love social media. I think it's fantastic. I use it all the time. But I will tell you, as a known conservative entity, my Twitter feed is definitely suppressed. There's no doubt about it. I have more than 20,000 followers, and it's maybe 10 people see it. They're allowed to go to my profile, of course, and see my various tweets and such, but we know that that's not going to happen. That doesn't work that way. So I'm concerned about that. And this is all in the context of fake news as well. So on the one hand, people decry the notion of fake news. On the other hand, they're more than happy to suppress news that they don't like to be projected out there. And that, to me, is the most troubling aspect of all this. Conservatives, by and large, are very happed up to go ahead and project as much news as possible. Some of it will be wrong, some will be right, but more information is better, and you do not get to truth by suppressing information. That's the only thing that concerns me about social media. But I see it, and I don't begrudge, for example, the New York Times, which is a very left-leaning newspaper. I find it to be inaccurate in many ways, but they have the prerogative to say, look, I don't want to publish a letter from Barak Lurie or publish his opinion piece. That's okay. They are not a platform, they are a publisher. Social media, by contrast, they are platforms ostensibly, and they do not treat themselves as such. They want to have the benefits of both worlds. They want to be a platform on the one hand and say, look, 1,000 flowers are blooming here. And on the other hand, they want to act like a publisher and be able to censor. That's what I think we need to guard against. That's the only place where I'm very concerned about the so-called fake news. Let's let 1,000 flowers bloom indeed, but don't cut off our flowers, so to speak. I hope that answers your question.
That's great. Professor Davis, I'm going to jump over to you. I know you have some additional thoughts on fake news, and I'll throw a fact at you. According to a 2019 Pew Research study, 1 in 5 adults get their news on social media, but 57% of them expect the news they see to be inaccurate. So what's going on here?
I don't know. I have no idea, but my students, if you had to gauge my students, that number would probably be more like 80%. They are confused as to where they're going to get the truth. And it was like, I believe as Tom mentioned earlier, there's a buffet of information out there. They have to walk in and test and try and see what they like and keep going back to the particular item of news, the news distributor that they like. They're concerned about fake news. And I just remind them, and Barak's point about fake news is he's really thinking out of the box in terms of what is neutral, what is fake, what is really acceptable. But fake news is basically a political term. It's a trend term. What it does has been around for quite a while, as long as there's been an information flow from cavemen to the
Exactly.
Gutenberg press. It's been around for the longest, and the old Soviets were experts at it. And basically what we are experiencing right now is an updated version of what the Soviets used in terms of sending out their own propaganda and making people think and believe, and confusing people. More importantly, it's used to confuse people and to cause dissension. And that's where we are. And there are facts, and then there are things that are not true. And facts are facts. And as long as the journalists, and again, I'm speaking from in a very narrow channel here, and it's about the journalists. They have to try to find out what those facts are, throw them on the table, and they have to walk away. Once you throw out the facts, you have to let them stay right there, and then people have to see them and come up with their own conclusions, and they're going to hate you. I remember in the old days at NPR when we were really liberal, and I use air quotes there. We were happy with stories if people from the left were upset with the story and people from the right were upset with the story. That happened often. We sensed at least that we were doing our job well. We don't want to be the journalists. You don't want to step into an echo chamber, look around and say, oh, I'm comfortable here. If you ever do that, you're in trouble. You just have to find out what the facts are. And if you can't get those facts, well, you don't have them. And one of the facts is that I can't get to the facts. You can't interpret for people. You can't assume for people. And unfortunately, in this digital world where there's a 24-hour news cycle just never ending, you're under pressure to come to a conclusion on what you think the facts are. And it's the worst thing for journalism, in my opinion. You just have to go ahead and lay it on the table and walk away from it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, by the way, if I could just chime in. Benjamin, I think you're spot on. I really like the way you phrased it. I especially like your point about how, you've done your job when you've got an equal amount of voices from the left and from the right disappointed in you. It's such a great point. It's a little bit like litigation or law where, they define a great settlement as one where both sides are equally pissed off. So it's the same thing. So anyway, I just wanted to chime in to say I really appreciate that comment.
David, I would love to hear about the role of relationships in your reporting. You described to us how reporting during the pandemic looks different. It is, much more virtual. Is your reporting more or less reliant on relationships now, and how else has the pandemic impacted the industry?
I mean, relationships is a weird word. I don't quite know that I feel as you can see, I feel a little uncomfortable even using it. I would say this, what do I do? I try to find people and get them to tell me stuff, right? That's one of the main things I do. And so there's some people where I'm doing a story, they don't want to talk to me. Coronavirus has made that more difficult. Before, if I wanted to talk to a city council member, I would walk up on them at City Hall if they don't call me back. If you don't call me back, I will find you. But now they all meet by Zoom. The door is locked to City Council chamber on a given meeting day because they're meeting remotely. And if they don't want to talk to me, I could walk up on them at their home, but I have a feeling they probably won't answer the door. And so in terms of like quote unquote relationships, that does make the relationship of, reaching someone more difficult. I also find that when I do make calls to people, I think this is actually dissipated a lot, but in the first 2 or 3 months, the phone calls were way longer. People were really like starved for human contact. And so you definitely like, you shoot the shit a little bit with people who are like wanting to make human relationships, in the course of their lives. And so you're like, oh yeah, man, I've been eating peanut butter muffins for like, weeks, So in terms of like the really nuts and bolts work I do, I would say things are a little different, right? I do find that I kind of have to do a little more, again, perusing of social media to get where people are coming from so I can get an idea of who might be the best person to pick. A lot of people do a lot more straight up statements. But yeah, I mean, people who don't want to call me back, it's harder because even if you want to establish kind of basic facts, one of the things I find maddening as somebody who writes about kind of the intersection of local government and land use and the issue of real estate development is the infernal concept of the limited liability company. And LLCs are used by all sorts of real estate folks, of course, to protect themselves, but it also makes ownership much more mysterious. And so, we're just like, hey, does this person A own company B? And if they don't call you back, then you have to like do like research. Like, is there a lawsuit? Can I check on the lawsuit? Is there, a determination letter in planning? Is there a planning case file that can get me this stuff, right? Like if people don't call you back in a pandemic about even basic facts, you are forced to go to document after document after document. I would also say, I know there's been a lot of kind of fake news talk around here, which I just think is such malarkey on one level, because I think fake news is usually a word used by somebody who doesn't like the news that they read. And that's like all you need to know going into it. They didn't like it, right? Maybe they had good reasons. Maybe they had super lame reasons, right? Just know it's a way of saying, oh, I didn't like that. It's like, Ibsen's Enemy of the People. People don't like hearing stuff they don't want to hear. They don't want to hear that there's DDT like half a mile out from the Southern California coastline, because then maybe they don't want to go swim in it, right? People don't like hearing news they don't want to hear. And so when you hear fake news, just be like, somebody didn't like hearing that and they want to discredit.
Right.
Just use that as your term in the back of your head whenever you're hearing the word fake. What you want is accountability, right? And so I also think, one of the ways that I try to, I think there was some fake news talk about credibility. One thing I try to do in my stories, and I don't always succeed, right? But I would say, like in the last couple of weeks, I think I have some good examples, right? I really tried to lard them down with hyperlinks, right? Sometimes it's a hyperlink to a previous story that I wrote. Sometimes it's a hyperlink to a previous story a colleague wrote. Frequently, like in some of my stories, like a determination letter, that's basically where a zoning guy says, this is good, you can build that, right? I will attach the zoning letter to a story. I will attach the campaign website to a story. I will hyperlink any number of documents, a campaign mailer, right? If I'm saying somebody is saying something in a campaign mailer, I'm going to hyperlink it. You don't believe me? You think I'm trying to hype it? Take a look at the mailer. Look, I'm telling you, this is what they're saying. The more you hyperlink and the more you back up what you're saying, I think the more people will trust the source. Now, I will say, I'm super busy. If a city councilman is arrested on a corruption charge, I am not going to spend that first hour hyperlinking. I'm going to slam something out as fast as humanly possible I can, so hey, that dude just got arrested, right? But if I have the time to do a longer, slower, deeper thought, I'm going to make sure that I, adorn it with as many Christmas tree ornaments as I can in terms of information, documents, websites, everything. So you can know, like, I'm not just pulling this stuff out of a hat, right? Like, I think about it. And I want to make sure people have the clearest, most understandable presentation possible. A lot of my colleagues are the same way. And so, I hear fake news and I just get like hair on my neck, because I'm like, I watch the people I work with, they sweat the notion that they weren't fair to somebody. They don't end a story well in their minds internally if they think like, did I give that person a fair shot? Did I let that person respond to whatever it is we're asking them about, particularly if it's a crappy question, right? What I want is that people, I tell people, you will see me coming. Like if I'm coming for you with a question that's not nice, and sometimes I ask questions that are not nice, right? Like that's part of my job. I have to ask an uncomfortable question. You will see me coming. And I will try to afford you an opportunity to lay out your case. I know this is way, way off whatever it is you asked, but now
Alison, can I jump in on there on that topic? Since we all get a chance to talk about fake news. Echoing what Dave said, the phrase fake news has just gotten too bloody easy. I don't like it, it's fake news. I don't agree with it, it's fake news.
Right, exactly.
And the problem is it works. The problem is that people hear that and they walk away from what could be an important piece of journalism, a poignant piece of journalism, or an accurate piece of journalism. It worries me that people increasingly are looking for news they agree with, not news that's important to them, or news that could help them explain to them something that's vital, that could change the way they think about something, or shape how they lead their lives. It worries me that the phrase fake news is keeping people from getting to journalism they should have. I hope that we all aren't looking for just journalism that we agree with. I think it's a shame that the country has gotten as polarized as it is, but it worries me as we get to these extremes that we're only looking for information that demonizes the other side. We're not looking for that information that runs down the middle, that really helps people and is the kind of quality journalism that changes lives. It really concerns me. If people, I think it's really important for students more than anyone else, but if people aren't aware of how hard we work to make things fair, about how we work. We just did a series of stories on the 5-year anniversary of the Aliso Canyon gas leak, and God, that was a ton of work. But the work wasn't just in allowing people to spout to condemn SoCal Gas or for SoCal Gas to tout the changes they've made. Most of the energy in that package was making sure that it was impeccably fair and that we vetted everything that we reported. So I don't think that people get an idea about how hard we work to make things balanced and to make things fair. And I got to tell you, it really ticks me off to have something that is our best effort dismissed so cavalierly as fake news. So I hope we can get to the point that we can start talking to each other again. I hope that we can start arriving at a point where we're not just looking for news that we agree with, but it looks like we've got rough years ahead of us along those lines. In the meantime,
You're so right. You're so right.
there are a
Tom.
lot of folks out there. Oh, sorry. There are a lot of folks out there who are trying to create an avenue of this is accurate. My organization, for example, partners with the Trust Project, which helps us validate that where we get our information, where it comes from, and they're a third party that helps verify things. I think the Times is involved with that sort of entity too, and I think that it's one area where we believe that some of our legacy media and how hard we work to verify is, I hope that pays dividends in the end among the readers. And I'm sorry, Barak.
Fake
No,
news.
I want to just agree with a lot of what you said and what David also said. I mean, first of all, I'm so impressed with the level of journalism and the detailed research. I mean, I'm in the business of research also, right? And I love doing that. By the way, my father was a journalist. He was actually a political cartoonist, the most syndicated in the world at the time. And boy, did he sweat the details. I mean, he loved doing that. So I know the hard work, and I certainly applaud that. And one of the concerns I have for journalism, and I'm sharing it, I share your viewpoints, everyone here. I think we all agree with it. The problem that we're dealing with is an increasingly, well, polarizing it means something different these days, but I call it the market segmentation aspect of it. It's business school 101, right? Where you don't make a car designed for everybody's interest. You make a car designed for, this particular niche of driver. So that the macho Arnold Schwarzenegger type of guy, he gets the Humvee, and there's a more of a station wagon sort of thing for the typical, a mom and who's got 3 kids and such, and she wants to have room in the back for groceries. She's not interested in power in the car as much. So that's market segmentation. And what you're seeing is, I think, from my perspective, and it's not a left or right issue, it's simply that people are looking, because they can have it, for that particular news outlet that they believe mirrors their viewpoints of what they want to see. So there are literally websites out there and news outlets there, fake or not, right or not, that cater to the religious viewpoint, that cater to the music lovers viewpoint, that cater to the pro-Israel viewpoint or the pro-Palestinian viewpoint, and so on. People gravitate toward that because they exist. And that's the main thing I think that we as journalists have to guard against and recognize, at least as the changing world. It is too tempting to, for the classic viewer or listener, as the case may be, to find a news outlet that says what he or she wants it to say. And they should be listening to all sorts of different viewpoints. And that is the real challenge, I think, that we all face. And that's my 2 cents on that.
Professor Davis, I saw you wanting to jump in there.
With some of the things that Tom was saying, but I really think that this is still a great time of optimism, and people will wait for it to shake out in terms of what they're going to end up trusting. And right now, everybody, the internet, this is all still very new. So we're still getting comfortable with what places we want to go to get information, and who do we trust. And I'm going to stop going to my uncle's source. I'm going to go to my aunt's source. It's all very new, and I think we should be easier on ourselves and not condemn ourselves, and not fall into what major media really wants us to do, which is to say you're either left or you're right. And that includes MSNBC and Fox News and even CNN. They will throw those terms out left and right, left and right. David, on the other hand, he can't afford to use those terms on the hyper-local level. He really has to look at what a person is, what they represent, and left and right doesn't always work for them. But this is all being it's all being formulated right now as we speak, this new digital information universe that we're in. And to Tom's point, information is a natural resource, I believe. Everybody has a right to information, and how they get it one way or the other, they need to get it. The quality of it should always remain the same. There's either a fire down the street or there isn't a fire. It's not maybe a fire down the street, there is a fire.
Right.
The quality of the information has to remain the same. And we all, my students, myself, my friends and family, we are all trying to figure out what sources we are starting to learn how to trust. And it's going to be the New York Times, it's going to be Frontline, it's going to be a Hilton Perez, who knows? But we're still starting to congregate around these water holes of information, those that we trust and those that we don't trust. And in the meantime, the journalist can't be too hard on him or herself in terms of what the consumer and what they interpret and what they see, because they're looking for the echo chamber. It's comfortable there. But you know, when the fire is down the street, the echo chamber does you no good.
Right. Right.
So we talked a little bit about the changing business model. There have certainly been growing pains in this move toward from print to online, but I think we heard a good sense of optimism from Tom when you were describing some of the things that have occurred. But we are now seeing maybe more, you guys have talked about increasing subscriptions, maybe more people willing to, you know, press pay or subscribe when they hit that paywall. What are you guys seeing with paywalls? Are they working better now? Are you getting, yeah, is that going to be something that helps us continue this transition forward into a new model?
Well, let me start by saying too that I failed to mention this in my segment. I should have, but my publications and David's as well during the pandemic put a ton of content in front of the paywall and gave it away for free. Absolutely. So I think we recognize that that's our responsibility, and we'll continue to do that when, you know, we're talking about an issue that really is about the public's health or their right to know is particularly poignant. I think we're going to continue to do that. That said, I think that, I think we both said this, the bottom line is journalism has value. And when you bought journalism in a magazine or in a newspaper, you walked up to the counter and you gave the gentleman a quarter for it. I think we got into a cycle that many folks in the public came to believe that information is free, that the fire hose that is the internet means that it was there, it was free, and I believed it. And I think there's been a hell of a lot of backlash there, because I think people are starting to experience that I clicked it, it was free, and maybe it wasn't so good, maybe it wasn't right. So not that clearly I work for a legacy media, and I believe in legacy media because of, you know, the tenets for which we stand and the way we create our stories. But I do believe that has value, and I think we are starting to see increasingly that people are willing to pay for it. I think that we need to be careful, though, that as we go forward, that legacy media aren't the only folks doing great journalism. I think that we all need to get better, though, at communicating on screen the kind of journalism that people are consuming. I think we're efforting that in our shop, but we're seeing it more, that we need to clearly label that something is an analysis. We need to clearly label that something is an opinion or a column. We need to clearly label that this is contributed content, that it is largely a kind of advertisement. I think we need to do better at clearly labeling that going forward.
Okay. Any other thoughts on paywalls from anybody?
I love them. I love them partly because it's philosophical, right? Like, I work too hard for me to be giving this away, you know? which isn't exactly like the business argument. You know, I mean, one of the things I got to say is, you know, as a reporter, I try not to know a ton about the economics of my exact company because I don't want to know it on one level. I mean, I'm not an idiot. I'm well aware that coronavirus zapped our print advertising, and that was a horrendous bummer for us as a publication. And, you know, what we've been doing is we've been trying to transition more to digital subscribers. And, you know, on the one hand, the loss of print advertising was very hard. And, you know, we had to, you know, make sacrifices over the summer. On the other hand, you know, I think this year has been such an off the charts bananas news year. Like, we quickly outstripped our goals for our digital subscriber base. And, you know, the main issue is, you know, the latter isn't producing enough money at this moment to address the former, right? But I would say just in terms of like the paywall, I'm like, bring them on, you know? I think,
well, you know, there's the digital divide there, and I understand the importance of the business model for the online entity. Subscribers, it pays, you have a recurring sense of revenue, gives you some predictability. You know when you're having churn, you can hire people. It all makes business sense.
Yeah.
But for some families, it's a question of, am I going to subscribe to an online entity, or am I going to make sure that I can get enough groceries for the end of the week? And they still need information. There's still valuable information that they need about the neighborhoods. And there has to be some way of keeping the information out there available to everyone. And during the pandemic, plenty of organizations, Tom and David as well, they gave away information free, but the pandemic's not going to be forever. And all of the subscribers that you accumulated during the pandemic, they will end up being part of your universe, and then people left out of your universe who can't afford the subscription. There goes the digital divide. And the information that you put out is just as important to someone in Santa Clarita, oftentimes, as it is in Northridge or in Pacoima. So we have to be cognizant of who's being left out when we have a subscription model in play.
Benjamin, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that's 100% spot on. I understand the notion of a paywall and such, and at the end of the day, it is about business and competition, right? It's people will pay for the paywall if they value it to do so, obviously. So the information is a product, and if they like that product, then they'll pay for it. Having said that, I think that one of the things I do love about the internet is so much can be provided for free that we would never have been having before. I mean, all of us use email. All of it is free. I don't know anybody who's paying for their email anymore, or even internet access necessarily. And that has been great for everyone. Think about all the money that we've saved in terms of writing letters and postmark and everything else. So a lot of great things have happened via the internet. And I think, again, not to condemn it one way or the other, I'm simply saying it's simply a business model that might be the smart way to go. Media outlets still make money through sponsorships and advertisements, of course, as it is. I mean, it may just go the way of network TV like it used to be with advertising. So I'm with Benjamin on this. I think I'd rather have more free access to information than having to kind of create that paywall. And even I myself, I tend to demur a little bit when I see a paywall. I want to get the information. I feel like, look, you can provide this information and still make revenue out of it. I mean, radio does it all the time. TV does it all the time, and newspapers might have to do it more. So
I mean,
anyway.
I would say if we had taken down our paywall. Sorry.
I was just going to say, but TV, radio, and newspapers are all supported by advertising. So it's not free. They are being, supported with a financial model that is dependent on advertising. And Tom, as you mentioned before, going and paying a quarter for a newspaper, that that was never paying full freight for the news, because it was the fact that we were exposing readers to local advertisements that was paying the freight of the journalism. So at the same time that you have these shifts happening with paywalls and getting people to think about the cost of reporting, you also have the California Consumer Privacy Act happening, and people saying, well, I don't want to see ads. I don't want to be targeted for ads. I want privacy. People are more and more thinking that way, and those things may come to conflict as well. So I don't know if there's an additional comment any of you guys want to make on that.
Well, you
say
mentioned
one thing
that.
real quick.
Oh, go ahead, Dave.
No, the person I sit next to at City Hall when I can actually get into City Hall, she has a Twitter page. The very top of her Twitter page says, the LA Times will be regularly updating this free page on everything you need to know right now on coronavirus. And she put it up there, and many people did the same, because we knew that there was a balance. We knew that we literally needed subscribers and a paywall for our survival, right? But we also weighed the fact that we wanted people to have information that they need to be able to get it through the free page, through newsletters, through other means, right? I would say one thing about the digital divide, and the weird thing is information is weirdly freer than ever, right? And it's, I loathe to go back to the Twitter talk, but I will do it one more time. With Twitter, you can follow any individual voice or writer, right? And the thing that I think is so interesting about social media is if you want to follow just Maggie Haberman, that woman is the most prolific person ever. And with no paywall, no nothing, you're going to follow Maggie Haberman of the New York Times as she chronicles every burp and fart of the Trump administration until it's over. If you want to follow Dave Weigel from the Washington Post, who has probably the most intimate understanding of congressional races, that you can follow exactly where he's going, what he's highlighting, because what these folks do is they don't just highlight their own work, they curate 25, 50, 100 other voices. And this multitude, they're saying look what we see this stuff, right? And so the one thing say that is good about social media that I think may have been lost in some of the criticism of whether it's restrictive or not restrictive is you can find a way to get access to people in a way you never could before. And the one thing, I am not an optimistic person. It is not in my DNA. But I will say this, I see what the potential of that is. And the potential of that is Twitter is an IV drip for news. If you are a person, no means, I don't care who you are, you have a freaking phone. You upload that app and you can look, literally for the last 2 weeks, what do we hear about? Doom scrolling. Nothing but doom scrolling. People are literally, it's replaced TV for people, looking at incredibly bad news for hours on end, lying in bed in a fetal position. So you can, if you want to follow George Conway, husband of Conway, that dude pumps out thoughts at such a rapid clip. He highlights, what he saw on CNN. He highlights what he saw on Fox. That dude has a point of view, a very distinct one. But in that way, I think access to news is just, crazy accessible, right? But if you want to drill down, if you want to see my sad little hyperlink to an LLC from the Secretary of State's website, I don't know that we can't charge, and maybe that'll change. Somebody's going to pull something out of their hat with the internet where suddenly the revenue we get with an online ad will be commensurate to what a print one is. It's not that way today. And believe me, none of this is what I want. I used to work at the LA Weekly 12 years ago. That thing was a freaking phone book every week. Before that, I worked at the Daily Breeze. The Beach Reporter was a weekly. They had 50 pages of real estate ads that buttressed their really great local coverage. Those days are gone. They're not coming back. And I think everyone's trying to find the right way to do justice by their readers, and people are going to make mistakes. But the ultimate goal is to get information to their readers that provides accountability and information.
Well, sooner or later, software is going to catch up with the subscription model, I believe. A friend of mine always sends out these great Wall Street Journal articles, and I get frustrated because I didn't have my subscription, and I'm thinking I'm going to go ahead and start subscribing it. And another friend said, hey, look, there's a way around it. And lo and behold, there's a way around the subscription model in order to get that particular bit of information. At some point, the technology is going to force business models to adjust and to change. And it could be almost like the printing presses are now of pretty much of no use, and the subscription walls will be of no use at some point, I believe, because of software, because of technology. And I believe the greater flow of information is your best protection. People will come to your well if you're giving them good information, telling them good stories. The advertisers, I believe, will say, hey, there are a lot of people at your well. You must be telling some great stories. And I don't know if it always feeds the family. I don't know if it always leads to your being able to hire 2 or 3 people or not. But
Right.
I do think that the half-life on that is better than what exists now with a model that is susceptible to ever-increasing sophisticated software.
Right. Well, look, I just to add to Benjamin's point, and by the way, I wouldn't mind you sending me a link for that Wall Street Journal paywall end round, and it's for a friend. It's not for me.
Hold on there.
Anyway, I'm just kidding around. So, but the point is, I'm totally kidding around. But what you, Benjamin, and you're talking about, I think you're 100% right, is that we're dealing with growing pains, or maybe changing pains when it comes to we're dealing with journalism. It's really fascinating. And we just have to be, Johnny on the spot, ready to see what is happening and still kind of keep our integrity throughout. But look what happened to the bookstores. Look what happened to the music industry. Now, when's the last time you bought an album, right? You only buy songs, and even that is free if you buy a monthly subscription and so on. Even books, and I publish books, and most of my books are now heard on Audible or Kindle. So things are always changing, and unfortunately, and in some ways, fortunately, things are changing in the journalism world as well. I find it fascinating, and I think I echo Benjamin's keen interest in wondering how it's all going to shake out in 10 years' time, for example.
So, Professor Davis, looking ahead, let's have our last question for today be about students, the future journalists. What do you tell them about their potential and what the future holds as they look to move from student to practitioner?
I tell them, first of all, to stay away from old folks like myself. I say, because you'll hear us complaining all the time about the good old days, and especially in broadcast. The salaries, the helicopters. Heck, I used to lease helicopters and order cars, and it was just great. And I tell them, just stay away from them. If they're not talking, optimistic to you, you shouldn't be around them, because they're bad for your aspirations. Because I think the future is actually pretty darn good. And I really believe a lot of it lies in the local news. And look at it, 9/11, one of the biggest local news stories ever, but it was a local news story. And they should be keyed in on their communities and drilling out information from their communities. And at some point, they'll figure out how to make money off of that, if that's what they want to do. I have at least 2 students who have developed blogs that they started in my class that are now money makers. It actually supports them. And there's just so many ways that they can go about gathering information and sending information out and enjoy and feeling a sense of a purpose. But where you want to go, if you want to work at KNBC locally and make a set amount of money and have your face on television, and your auntie will say, hey, I saw you on TV today, and you're very happy. That's all good, that'll happen, but there are also other ways of doing it online. And I actually are pushing more students to get online, in front of the camera online. And it's just good. It's not, journalism is nowhere near dead, nowhere near. It's changing, and we just have to adjust to it. And it's all digital, and we have to be aware of those software programs that can take away our ability to report as journalists. And we have to focus on those things that the software programs cannot touch. So I tell them, I say, you have to write well. You have to be a great writer. You have to sharpen up your interview techniques, and you have to know how a camera works in detail. These are things that a robot will not be able to do. So you focus on those things, you'll always be employable. You'll always be able to go out there and grab that information and bring it back and send it out again.
Yeah.
Excellent. What a great note to end on. With that, I'm going to have to close out the conversation as we are out of time for this panel. I want to thank our track sponsor, Viacom CBS, and again, KP Public Affairs was also proud to sponsor this panel. Since we can't give our panelists the round of applause that they have earned, we're going to instead send a big virtual thank you and virtual round of applause. We really appreciate all of you spending your morning with us and sharing some very insightful comments and gave us some good things to think about for the news industry moving forward. Our keynote speaker is going to begin at 11:50 today. So we have about a 15-minute break here to go grab a snack or a cup of coffee or run to the restroom. I encourage you all to visit our exhibitors on the VICA Conference Pathable site so you can enter the raffle to win a number of prizes, which include round-trip tickets on Southwest, a signed jersey from the LA Rams, and many other gift cards. So again, thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you so much to our audience, and hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day and a great Halloween weekend at home.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You.
Thank you.
Thank you.